This is for part A of the Lab 5 for meat and the comparison of 2 grades of beef. So here I have prime ribeye, and this is choice ribeye, and this is the olive oil that I'm gonna use. Looking at the choice ribeye, we can see that the muscle is dark red in color and the majority of the entire piece is consisting of muscle. And in terms of fat, the fat throughout this piece is consistent, but there is especially fat along the outer edges, as you can see here. And you can also see too that the outer edge appears to be a kind of paler pinkish whitish color. And in terms of connective tissue, we can see that all the connective tissue is the pinkish whitish shade of color, and it's connecting sections of the meat to other and to the bone throughout. Looking at the prime now, we can see that it's a little lighter red in color compared to the choice, and that is due to more marbling of fat throughout this piece of prime ribeye right here. And in terms of fat, there's more contrast of fat in the choice over here compared to the prime. And the prime has more marbling throughout, as you can see. And for connective tissue in this prime ribeye, within this steak, it contains small and large sections of marble throughout. And again, there's more marbling in this piece compared to the choice. Here I preheated my oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I have a skillet that I'm going to prepare to use now. Okay, so now I just put in my 2 teaspoons of oil, and we can see that this is piping hot. As you can see, I've added some seasoning to my steak, and this is choice on the left and prime on the right. Now both of these steaks are going to be put in the oven at 450 degrees. Okay, now both of my grades of steak are done cooking, and I'm going to start with the choice over here. So I'm going to cut that open in a new video. I had just tasted the choice ribeye, and I noticed that it was pretty easy for me to chew and cut, and the texture was pleasant as well, and there was juiciness that was present when I had eaten this piece, and the seasoning that I used was really good for this piece, and it had a lot of flavor in it, so I enjoyed this piece of steak a lot from using this seasoning right here. So I just tried some of the choice ribeye, and now I have my prime ribeye that I'm going to cut into now. After trying the prime ribeye, I noticed that this was a little easier to cut than the choice ribeye, and it was extremely tender when I had tasted this, and the texture was pleasant throughout. And in terms of juiciness, I noticed that this was juicier than the choice ribeye that I tried, and the juiciness was even observable when I began cutting into this piece. And for flavor, I loved this prime ribeye cut the best, not only because I used the same seasoning, but I also like this because it was much more tender. Overall thoughts and a wrap up on part A of this lab. So what I had done for the comparison of 2 grades of beef, I obtained the required ingredients, which were 4 ounces of 1 grade of beef steak, prime, choice, or select, and 4 ounces of a different grade of steak, which was a different grade again, but same cut of meat, and 2 teaspoons of oil or butter, and I ended up using oil for this. What I had done for the procedure is I examined the raw steaks, and I noted the color, amount, and location of the fat and connective tissue, and the color of the muscle, and I recorded the observations in the table. And the meats that I did end up using were choice ribeye and prime ribeye. And then also too, I preheated the oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and I had my skillet ready. And then I turned the stovetop on and I warmed up the skillet until it was piping hot. Then I dropped my 2 teaspoons of oil in the pan and let that come to be heated up. And then I also seasoned my steaks as well, and I seasoned both of them the same way. Using tongs, I did put the first steak in the pan and sear that for about 90 seconds on each side in order to lock in the juices. And then I repeated that same step for the next kind of steak. And then from that point, I placed the steaks on a baking sheet, making sure to note the placement of each of them so I wasn't confused. And I put those in the oven for about 6 to 9 minutes. And then I took both of those steaks out, tasted them, and recorded my findings in the table as well. Reflecting on this lab, I feel that everything went the way it was supposed to, and it was what I had expected, and I really don't feel that I ran into any issues, especially since both grades of meat, once they were done cooking, I feel that they were good and they were not undercooked or overcooked. I felt like they were just right. And this lab brought home the point that there are differences between beef grades, and I never really thought about that before. I was aware throughout just all the years of my life that there were different grades of beef, but I just didn't really care to pay attention to that, and I was like, oh, it just doesn't matter. But especially too, I learned from what I had used for this lab that prime roasts and steaks are good for dry heat cooking, such as broiling, roasting, or grilling. And choice beef is high quality also, but it has less marbling than prime does. And choice roast and steak from the loin rib will be pretty tender, juicy, and flavorful, and it's suited for dry heat cooking. But pretty much there are just differences between beef grades, and cooking it to the right way is important in whether you have a tender steak or not, depending on what you're using it for. So that's really important when before I did not even think twice about it. So I feel that this lab was very helpful and both of them turned out really good. So I'm pretty happy with how this entire thing went.